station named Orpheus 7 was not a place where life was meant to exist. It was a bruise on the face of the sector, a violent sphere of rock and ice trapped in the gravity well of a gas giant that constantly tried to tear it apart. The sky was a permanent swirling bruise of auroras, bleeding sickly greens and violets into the upper atmosphere, illuminating the shattered rings that encircled the moon like a crown of broken glass. Down on the surface, the wind screamed. It was a sound that never truly stopped, a harmonic vibration that dug into the plasteel bones of Outpost 4 Alpha and made the walls sing with a low, mournful thrum. This was a lonely place, a relay and mining station on the absolute fringe of human expansion, automated to the point where it barely needed a pulse to keep running. Jonah Rhee sat in the observation blister of the mess hall, watching the ammonia storms batter the reinforced transparasteel. He was in his mid-30s, though the gray streaking his temples and the fine lines around his eyes argued he was older. He wore a gray flight suit that had seen better decades. The sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms mapped with the white, jagged scars of old burns and shrapnel kisses. "Bishop," Jonah said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Tell me the atmospheric pressure isn't dropping again. I just calibrated the external seals." The station AI's voice drifted from the overhead speakers. It was a dry, synthesized baritone, deliberately programmed to sound bored. "The pressure is holding, Jonah. However, the wind shear has increased by 12%. If you were planning a picnic, I would advise against it. The sandwich integrity would be compromised immediately." Jonah snorted, staring into the swirling dark outside. "Funny. You're a riot, Bishop. Any incoming traffic?" "You ask that every 6 hours," Bishop replied. "The answer remains the same. No traffic. No scheduled supply drops for another 3 months. We are, as the poets say, alone in the dark." Jonah looked down at the datapad resting on the scratched metal table. On the screen was a message he had written 3 days ago. It was short, just a few lines. "Thinking of you. Hope the kids liked the credits I sent. Stay safe." It was marked simply, "Read." Not replied. Just read. He tapped the screen, turning it off. The silence of the outpost pressed in on him. It was a heavy physical thing. Jonah had come here to escape the noise of the core worlds, to get away from the memories of the wars that had chewed him up and spat him out as a medic with shaky hands and too many ghosts. But sometimes, in the quiet of the shift change, the ghosts found him anyway. "Check the long-range sensors again," Jonah said, standing up and taking his lukewarm coffee to the recycler. "I thought I saw a ghost ping on the southern quadrant array." "Solar flare interference," Bishop dismissed. "The gas giant is throwing a temper tantrum. Radiation spikes are creating phantom signatures. You are seeing things, Jonah." "Yeah," Jonah muttered, rubbing the back of his neck where a neural interface jack sat cold and dormant. "Story of my life." He began his patrol, walking the long, curving corridor of the primary ring. The floor grating clanked rhythmically under his magnetic boots. The air smelled of ozone, recycled sweat, and machine oil. It was the smell of humanity on the edge of dying, stubborn and industrial. High above the screaming winds, in the silent vacuum of the ring system, a shadow detached itself from a drifting asteroid. It was a ship, but it looked more like a shard of obsidian glass grown rather than built. The Silent Prayer was a Cathari stealth cruiser, a masterpiece of xenomorphic engineering. It moved without heat, without radar cross-section, slipping through the debris field like a needle through black silk. On the bridge, the air was cool and scented with lavender and heavy oxygen. The lighting was a soft, pulsating bioluminescence that emanated from the walls themselves. Lyriath stood by the tactical plot, her hands clasped behind her back. She was tall, lithe, and dangerous. Her skin was the color of twilight, a deep, rich violet that shimmered with faint iridescent patterns when she moved. These were not tattoos, but biological markers of her lineage and mood, currently glowing with a steady, icy blue calm. She was an intelligence officer of the Cathari Empire, a woman who wore her beauty like armor and her wit like a blade. But beneath the perfect posture and the cold eyes, there was a tremor of desperation. "Range to target?" she asked. Her voice was melodic, like water over stones, but it carried the weight of command. 200 kilometers, the pilot reported. He was wired directly into the ship's nervous system. His eyes rolled back, seeing the universe through the hull sensors. "Shields are holding at minimum output to mask our approach. The human sensors are primitive, but the radiation background is chaotic." Lyriath nodded. She looked at the holographic display floating in the center of the room. It showed the human outpost, a clumsy, blocky thing clinging to the hostile rock below. "A lonely little rock," a voice growled from the shadows. Varus, the strike leader, stepped into the light. He was a mountain of muscle and chitinous plating, a warrior caste Cathari who looked at Lyriath with barely veiled contempt. He preferred open war, not the dagger in the dark work of intelligence. "It is a soft target," Varus rumbled, crossing his massive arms. "Hardly worth the fuel to burn orbit. Why does the High Ministry want this rust bucket?" Lyriath turned to him, her bioluminescence shifting to a sharp, warning indigo. "The Ministry does not explain itself to the infantry, Varus. But if you must know, this outpost is a relay hub for their entire frontier network. It holds geological surveys, patrol routes, and encryption keys. We take the data core, we plant the evidence framing the Drax Syndicate, and we leave. It is a surgical strike." "Surgical?" Varus scoffed. "I prefer amputation." "And that is why I am in command," Lyriath said, her voice dropping a freezing octave. "My orders come from Minister Kalen himself. This mission is the key to stabilizing the sector. Or would you prefer to explain to the court why you failed a simple extraction because you wanted to make noise?" Varus grunted, looking away. He knew the game. In the Cathari courts, failure was not punished with demotion. It was punished with the erasure of one's entire family line. Lyriath felt the cold knot in her stomach tighten. She needed this. The Vipers back home were circling. If she returned with the human data and a war between the humans and the Drax successfully ignited, she would be untouchable. If she failed, she was dead. "Kale," Lyriath called out to the third figure on the bridge. The tech specialist was spindly, hunched over a console with nimble, multi-jointed fingers flying across the interface. He spun his chair around, grinning. "Yes. Oh, glorious leader. Are the dampeners ready? I want to breach their hull before their sensors even register a pressure drop." "Please," Kyle rolled his eyes. "It is human tech. I could breach it with a can opener and a bad attitude. The boarding drones are prepped. The cloaking field is synchronized with the storm interference. We are ghosts. Lyriath, just the way you like it." "Good," Lyriath said, turning back to the view of the moon. "Take us in. Attack profile Delta. No witnesses." Jonah was in engineering when the first anomaly hit. He was wrenching a stubborn bolt on the atmospheric scrubbers, grease up to his elbows, when the lights flickered. Not the usual brownout caused by the drills drawing too much power. This was different. A sharp, stuttering pulse that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "Bishop," Jonah said, freezing. "Report." "Power fluctuation in Sector 7, Bishop replied, sounding mildly annoyed. "Likely a micrometeorite impact on the solar array. I am rerouting. Jonah dropped the wrench. Sector 7 was the docking ring. Show me the camera feed for Sector 7. Cameras are offline in that sector. As I said, likely a meteorite. No, Jonah whispered. The combat instincts he had buried under 10 years of solitude and engine grease suddenly surged to the surface. The air pressure in the room felt wrong. The floor plates vibrated with a thud that was too rhythmic to be the storm. Bishop, initiate Protocol Yellow. Seal the bulkheads between the outer ring and the core. Jonah, really? There is no need to panic over a blown fuse. The paperwork required for a Protocol Yellow is... Do it! Jonah roared, grabbing his data pad and sprinting toward the weapons locker. On the screen of his pad, the phantom signal he had dismissed earlier flared bright red. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't radiation. It was a drive signature, close and hot. He reached the locker and punched in the code. The door hissed open, revealing a standard-issue kinetic shotgun and a heavy stun baton. He checked the load. Slugs. Heavy impact. He shoved the baton into his belt and racked the slide of the shotgun. The sound was loud and comforting in the empty room. Bishop, Jonah said, his voice deadly calm now. Sound the alarm. We have boarders. As if in answer, the station shook. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the hull, followed by the terrifying scream of escaping atmosphere. The breach was a work of art, The silent prayer had matched the rotation of the outpost perfectly. Magnetic grapples fired, locking the stealth ship against the human hull like a tick on a dog. Kale's cutting lasers traced a perfect circle in the outer airlock door, searing through the thick alloy in seconds. The circle of metal fell inward, clanging against the deck. Liriath was the first through. She wore combat armor that hugged her form, a matte black composite that absorbed light. Her helmet was retracted, a transparent visor shielding her face, allowing her violet skin to glow with the adrenaline of the hunt. She held a pulse rifle, a sleek weapon that fired bolts of accelerated plasma. Behind her, Varus squeezed through the breach, his heavy cannon scanning the corridor. 2 combat drones, floating spheres of chrome and sensor eyes, drifted past them, scanning the darkness. Atmosphere venting, Liriath said, her voice crisp over the squad link. Seal the breach behind us. Done, Kale chirped from the ship, remotely welding a patch over the hole. You have atmosphere. Gravity is 0.8 standard. The air tastes like rust, by the way. Focus, Liriath snapped. Varus, secure the intersection. I am heading for the data core. Eliminate any resistance. There is only one biosign, Varus grunted, checking his scanner. 1 human male, weak, unarmored. Then do not make a mess of him, Liriath said. Clean kills. They moved out, silent and lethal. The corridor was dimly lit by emergency strobes, casting long, strobing shadows. The station groaned around them. Liriath felt a thrill of anticipation. This was the dance, the intricate ballet of espionage and violence. She moved with fluid grace, checking corners, her weapon an extension of her will. They reached the first junction. Suddenly, a steam pipe to their left ruptured. A jet of superheated vapor blasted across the corridor. Varus roared, stumbling back as the steam hit his shields. Ambush, Varus shouted, opening fire blindly into the steam. Hold fire, Liriath commanded. Through the white haze, a kinetic slug slammed into the drone hovering near Liriath's head. The drone shattered, spraying sparks and shrapnel. Liriath dropped to a knee, her eyes scanning the steam. Target is armed. He knows the terrain. He is a nuisance, Varus growled. I will crush him. No, Liriath said, seeing the blast marks on the wall. He's hurting us. He blew that pipe to force us toward the maintenance shaft. He's trying to keep us away from the core. She tapped her comms. Kale, Override the internal doors. Lock them open. I am not playing cat and mouse with a lonely engineer. Working on it, Kale replied. His security encryptions are surprisingly robust. Old, but stubborn. Give me 30 seconds. You have 10. Liriath broke from cover, dashing through the fading steam. She saw a shadow move at the end of the hall, a figure in a gray suit, retreating. She raised her rifle and fired a warning shot, scorching the metal wall beside his head. "Surrender, human!" she called out, her translator projecting her voice in harsh, metallic common. "And you will live!" The human didn't stop. He vaulted over a cargo crate and vanished around a corner. Jonah's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. They were fast, faster than any pirates he had ever seen. And the tech, that wasn't raider gear. That was military grade. "Bishop, tell me you have the internal turrets online," Jonah gasped, sliding down a ladder into the lower maintenance tunnels. "The turrets are responding," Bishop said. "But the intruders are hacking the system. I am losing control of the blast doors in sectors 3 through 5. They're after the core," Jonah realized. "They aren't here for the ore. They want the data." He checked his shotgun. 4 rounds left. He couldn't go toe-to-toe with them. They had shields. He had a flight suit and a prayer. "Okay," Jonah breathed, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Okay. If I can't stop them, I can slow them down. Bishop, cut the gravity in the central corridor." "Jonah, that will make movement difficult for you as well. Just do it." The gravity generator whined and died. Jonah felt his stomach lurch as weightlessness took hold. He kicked off the wall, floating down the shaft, using the handholds to pull himself along with the grace of someone who had spent years in 0G. He emerged into the central corridor just as the heavy Cathari soldier, the big one, floated into view. The alien flailed for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden shift. Jonah lined up his shot. He didn't aim for the alien. He aimed for the fire suppression canister bolted to the ceiling above him. Bang! The canister exploded, filling the corridor with thick, opaque chemical foam. The alien roared in confusion. Blinded, Jonah kicked off the bulkhead, propelling himself toward the auxiliary access tunnel that led to the core. He had to beat them there. He had to engage the manual lockout. Liriath watched the foam fill the corridor on her helmet display. "Clever," she murmured. "He fights like a cornered rat." "I cannot see," Varys bellowed over the comms. "Switch to thermal, you idiot," Liriath snapped. She activated her magnetic boots, anchoring herself to the floor despite the lack of gravity. She walked up the wall, bypassing the foam-filled center of the hallway. She reached the heavy blast door of the data core. It was sealed. "Kale, open it." "I am trying." "Liriath!" "The AI is fighting back. It keeps rewriting the access codes in a dead language. Latin, I think." "Burn it," Liriath ordered. She pulled a breaching charge from her belt and slapped it onto the lock mechanism. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion was a dull thump in the low pressure. The door groaned and slid open a few inches. Jammed. Liriath didn't wait. She grabbed the edge of the door with her powered gauntlets and heaved. Metal screamed as she forced the gap wide enough to slip through. She was inside. The data core room was a cylinder of humming servers, bathed in cold blue light. In the center stood the primary interface console, and standing between her and the console was the human. He was breathing hard, floating near the ceiling, his shotgun leveled at her. "Step away," Jonah warned, his voice shaking slightly but his aim steady. "You don't know what you're messing with." Liriath raised her pulse rifle. The standoff lasted a heartbeat. "I am not here to kill you, human," Liriath said smoothly. "I only want the data. Walk away." "Can't do that," Jonah said. He fired. The slug hit Liriath's kinetic shield, flaring bright gold. The impact threw her back a step, but the shield held. She returned fire, a precise bolt of plasma that struck the shotgun in Jonah's hands. The weapon heated instantly, burning his palms. Jonah shouted and let go, the ruined gun drifting away. "Bishop, vent the room," Jonah yelled. "Unable," the AI replied, its voice glitching. "System control transferred." Lyriath stepped forward, keeping her rifle trained on Jonah. "It is over. Kale, I am at the terminal. Initiate the interface." She reached the console. She didn't look at Jonah. She pulled a data spike from her wrist gauntlet and jammed it into the port. "Accessing root directory," Kale's voice buzzed in her ear. "Extracting the survey maps, planting the fabricated logs." "Wait. Wait, what?" Lyriath asked, watching the progress bar fill. "There is something else here," Kale said, sounding confused. "A sublayer. It is massive, and it is waking up." On the console, the blue lights turned a deep, angry crimson. "What did you do?" Jonah whispered, his face draining of color. He wasn't looking at her gun anymore, he was looking at the screen. "I am just wiping the local drive," Lyriath said, a sudden spike of unease piercing her calm. "Kale, abort. Just grab the files and disconnect." "I cannot disconnect," Kale panicked. It grabbed me. The system, it is pulling data from us. It is reading our drive signatures, our biometrics, our threat assessment." A low, buzzing alarm began to sound. It wasn't the station alarm. It was a sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a deep, primal vibration that rattled teeth. Jonah floated toward the floor, grabbing a handrail. He looked terrified, not of her, but for her. "That's not a security program," Jonah said, his voice hollow. "That's the dead hand." "The what?" Lyriath demanded. "The SOS," Jonah said. "The Deathworlders SOS. It's hard-coded into the old relay stations, and it's for when we think we're going extinct." The screen in front of Lyriath flashed. The alien script vanished, replaced by stark, blocky human letters that burned into her retinas. "Threat detected. Classification. Existential. Protocol. Scorched Earth. Beacon. Active." "Lyriath, get out of there!" Kale screamed over the comms. "Energy surge detected. It is broadcasting. It is broadcasting on all frequencies." A shockwave of energy blasted from the console, throwing Lyriath backward. Her HUD flickered and died. The gravity slammed back on, magnified, pinning her to the deck. Jonah crumpled to the floor as the artificial gravity dialed up to 2 Gs, then fluctuated wildly. "Bishop!" Jonah groaned, struggling to lift his head. "Cancel the SOS!" "I cannot. Jonah!" The AI's voice was no longer bored. It was cold, robotic, stripped of personality. "The beacon is autonomous. The signal has been sent." Lyriath struggled to her knees, fighting the crushing gravity. Her bioluminescence was flashing rapidly in distress. "What signal? Who are you calling?" Jonah looked at her, and for the first time, she saw pity in his eyes. "Everyone," Jonah rasped. "We just rang the dinner bell for the worst monsters in the galaxy." On the main display, a final message scrolled across the crimson screen. It was a line that would be repeated on news feeds for months. A line that would start a war and end an era. Alert. Outpost 4 Alpha under siege. Status. Deathworlder assets compromised, requesting immediate sanction. The signal punched through the atmosphere of Orpheus 7, tearing through the magnetic interference of the storms. It streaked out into the black, traveling faster than light, screaming into the void, and in the deep, dark places of the galaxy, things that had been sleeping woke up. "You should have just killed me," Jonah whispered, closing his eyes as the station began to shake violently around them. You really should have just killed me. Lyriath stared at the screen, the red light bathing her violet skin in the color of blood. She had come here to save her career. Instead, she had just triggered the end of the world. The universe did not scream when the Deathworlders' SOS went out. It shuddered. The signal was not merely a transmission of data. It was a violent, omnidirectional pulse of electromagnetic aggression, a scream of binary rage hard-coded into the Outpost's marrow centuries ago. It hit the Cathari stealth cruiser, the silent prayer like a hammer striking glass. Above the moon, the ship's cloaking field shattered into a kaleidoscope of failing geometry, and its navigation banks fused into useless slag. Down on the surface of Orpheus 7, the reaction was immediate and geological. The moon's magnetic field, already unstable due to the proximity of the gas giant, went into convulsions. The auroras in the sky twisted from sickly green to a blood-bruised crimson, descending until the static charge in the air tasted like copper and ozone. The automated mining drills in the distance ground to a halt, their safeties fried, while the outpost itself groaned as the gravity plating lost synchronization. Jonah Rhee was thrown against the console, the breath driven from his lungs. The red light of the SOS beacon was the only steady thing in a world that had suddenly gone sideways, literally. As the artificial gravity canted 45 degrees to the port side, Lyriath was scrambling, her boots losing purchase on the tilting deck. Her helmet HUD was a frantic blur of error messages. System failure, link severed, external radiation critical. "Turn it off," she shouted, her voice distorted by the screeching feedback in the room. "Human, make it stop." "I can't," Jonah yelled back, grabbing a handrail to keep from sliding into the pit of the server bank. "It's a dead-hand protocol. Once the pin is pulled, you don't put it back." The station lurched violently. A conduit in the ceiling, overloaded by the power surge, burst open. It wasn't just steam this time. It was a primary plasma line. The explosion was deafening. A wall of white-hot fire rolled across the ceiling, melting the sensors and blowing out the reinforced viewport that looked out onto the lunar surface. The storm outside roared in, instantly sucking the atmosphere out of the room. Decompression was a physical blow, a giant invisible hand yanking everything toward the jagged hole in the wall. The roar of escaping air drowned out all thought. Lyriath was light. Cathari physiology was built for grace, for low-gravity environments, not for resisting the brutal physics of a pressure differential. She was lifted off her feet, her magnetic boots failing as the floor power died. She flew toward the breach, her arms flailing, her fingers scraping uselessly against the smooth metal of the floor. She saw the jagged teeth of the torn hull. She saw the violent, swirling violet of the storm outside. She knew, with a cold, crystalline certainty, that she was dead. Then something clamped around her ankle. It was a grip like iron. Jonah had wedged himself into the doorframe of the emergency bulkhead, his legs locked against the jamb, his left hand gripping the manual override lever, and his right hand locked around Lyriath's boot. His face was a mask of strain, veins bulging in his neck, eyes squeezed shut against the debris flying past them. He wasn't thinking about politics. He wasn't thinking about the invasion. He was a combat medic, and the only rule that mattered in the chaos was that you did not let the patient die. "Hold on," Jonah roared, though the sound was swallowed by the vacuum. He heaved. It was an ugly, desperate movement. He yanked her back with every ounce of hysterical strength his adrenaline-flooded system could muster. Lyriath crashed into the deck plating inside the corridor, tumbling past him. Jonah slammed the manual lever down. The heavy blast door slammed shut, severing the vacuum's pull with a bone-jarring thud. The silence that followed was heavy and wheezing. The air in the corridor was thin, the emergency scrubbers struggling to cope with the sudden loss of pressure. But it was breathable. Jonah slid down the wall, gasping, clutching his ribs. Liriath lay in a heap of black armor and violet limbs a few meters away. For 10 seconds, the only sound was the harsh rasp of their breathing and the distant, muffled booming of the storm outside battering the hull. Then, the soldier in her kick in. Liriath scrambled backward, bringing her pulse rifle up. Jonah, moving with the sluggishness of a man who had just strained every muscle in his back, raised his kinetic shotgun. They froze. The barrel of her high-tech energy weapon stared down the barrel of his battered, grease-stained slug thrower. "Drop it," Liriath hissed. Her bioluminescence was flaring wildly, chaotic patterns of indigo and sharp white pulsing across her face, betraying her terror. Jonah spat a glob of blood onto the deck. He looked at her, then at the gun, then back at her. "I just saved your life, lady. You're welcome." Liriath's brow furrowed. She tapped the side of her helmet. "Translate. Repeat." Her personal translator, a sophisticated piece of linguistic jewelry embedded in her collar, gave a sad little chirp. Then, in a flat, monotone voice, it spoke. "The bipedal mammal suggests he has deposited a fragranced pastry in your timeline. You are a rug." Jonah blinked. "What?" Liriath narrowed her eyes, assuming this was some coded human insult. "My weapon is fully charged. Do not mock me with pastry metaphors. Surrender." "The system is fried," Jonah groaned, lowering his shotgun slowly, though he kept his finger near the trigger. "The EMP from the SOS scrambled everything. Your translator is drunk, and we have bigger problems." He pointed to the air quality indicator on the wall. It was flashing amber. "We are sealed in Sector 4, Jonah said, speaking slowly and clearly. "Life support is failing. That blast took out the main conduit. We have maybe 2 hours of air before we both suffocate. So you can shoot me, but you'll just die alone in the dark a little later." Liriath stared at him. She looked at the flashing light. She looked at the sealed door behind her, then the sealed door behind him. They were trapped in a 50-meter stretch of maintenance corridor. She lowered her rifle a fraction. "Truce? Truce," Jonah said. He engaged the safety on his shotgun and set it on the floor. "For now," Liriath hesitated, then holstered her weapon. Then, the tension didn't leave the air. It just changed flavor, shifting from immediate violence to a thick, suffocating wariness. "We need to bypass the breach," Jonah said, pushing himself up. He winced, his hand going to his lower back. "There is an auxiliary power junction in the subfloor crawl space. If we can patch the feed, we can get the scrubbers back to full power." "The crawl space?" Liriath looked at the maintenance hatch. It was small, dark. "I am an officer of the Cathari High Court. I do not crawl in tubes." "Then you are an officer of the High Court who is going to stop breathing at 1400 hours, Jonah said, popping the hatch. "After you, Your Highness." The crawl space was a nightmare of claustrophobia. It was a tangle of pipes, wires, and optical fibers, barely wide enough for a human shoulder. It was hot, smelling of burning insulation and old dust. Liriath went first, her night vision HUD flickering in and out, forcing her to rely on the natural glow of her skin to see. Jonah followed, his heavier frame scraping against the supports. "Shift left," Jonah grunted from behind her. "You're snagging the hydration line." "I am snagging everything," Liriath snapped back, her voice echoing in the tight metal tube. "Why do humans build their infrastructure like a nest of chaotic serpents? There is no elegance here, no flow. We build it to work, not to look pretty," Jonah muttered. The crawl space narrowed as they reached the junction box. They were forced to lie side by side, their bodies pressed together in the cramped dark. The heat was oppressive. Jonah could feel the coolness of her armor against his arm, and where the armor plates had gaps at the joints, he could feel the strange, feverish warmth of her skin. "Hand me the hydro spanner," Jonah said, reaching blindly into his tool belt. Lirith grabbed the tool from him. Her hand brushed his. Her skin was smooth, unnervingly dry, and electric. Jonah flinched. Lirith stiffened. "Your pulse is elevated," Lirith noted, her voice tight. She was staring at the junction box, refusing to look at him, but her peripheral vision caught the sweat beading on his forehead. "Yeah. Well, I'm stuck in a pipe with an enemy combatant who smells like..." Jonah paused. He inhaled. She didn't smell like ozone or chemicals. She smelled like rain on hot stone, like ozone and crushed flowers. It was disarming, like trouble. "You smell like grease and anxiety," Lirith retorted, jamming the spanner into the release bolt. She turned it. Sparks showered down on them. Lirith cried out, recoiling, her helmet slamming into Jonah's shoulder. "Easy!" Jonah grabbed her arm to steady her, his hand wrapped around her bicep, his thumb pressing against the bioluminescent strip running down her arm. The light pulsed under his touch, reacting to the contact, shifting from a nervous indigo to a softer, startled lavender. They froze again. The intimacy of the space was sudden and overwhelming. They were inches apart. Jonah could see the intricate fractal patterns in her irises. He could see the fear she hid behind the arrogance, and she could see the exhaustion etched into the lines of his face, the gray stubble on his jaw. "I have it," Lirith whispered, pulling her arm away slowly. "The circuit is bridged." A hum reverberated through the floor. The emergency lights in the crawl space flickered from amber to a steady, dim white. The air circulation fans whirred to life, pushing a stream of cool, recycled oxygen over their sweating faces. "Good job," Jonah exhaled, letting his head rest against a bundle of cables. "Do not patronize me," Lirith said, but there was no heat in it. She tapped into the junction's data port with her gauntlet. "Since we have power, I am accessing the local node. I need to know the extent of the damage." A holographic display projected from her wrist, hovering in the darkness between them. It showed the status of the outpost, red zones everywhere, but it also showed the status of the SOS beacon. Lirith scrolled through the data, her eyes widening. This is not a rescue beacon." "I told you," Jonah said quietly. "It's a dead hand." "No." Lirith shook her head, the light from the hologram painting her face in ghostly blues. "I mean, I am reading the protocols. It is broadcasting a warning to all navigation computers in the sector. It has flagged the Orpheus system as..." She paused, struggling with the human military terminology. "Sanction extremis, what is this?" Jonah closed his eyes. "It means kill zone. It means the United Terran Authority has authorized the use of chaotic weaponry, kinetic bombardment, planet crackers. The protocol assumes that if this alarm goes off, the outpost has fallen to something that cannot be contained. The fleet isn't coming to save us, Lirith. They're coming to burn the infection out." Lirith stared at him, horror dawning on her face. "But we are here. You are here. They would kill their own? To stop a Deathworld threat? Yeah, without blinking. Why?" Lirith whispered. "Why are you people so terrified of everything?" "We aren't terrified of everything," Jonah said, opening his eyes and looking straight at her. "We're terrified of ourselves." He shifted, trying to find a comfortable position for his aching back. "You call us Deathworlders," Jonah said. "To you, it's an insult, or a monster story to scare your kids. But for us, it's history, Earth, Orpheus, Tartarus. We evolved on worlds that tried to kill us every single day. Bacteria, gravity, weather, predators. We didn't survive by being graceful or harmonious. We survived by being stubborn, by being violent, by refusing to die. He gestured vaguely at the station around them. That SOS, it's not calling for help. It's admitting that we failed to contain something. And when a human admits they can't contain something, the only option left is to erase the board. Lirith shut off the hologram. The darkness returned, heavier than before. "We need to get out of this shaft," she said quietly. "My ship. I need to contact my command. If the humans are coming to burn the system, the Cathari fleet must intercept them. My ministry will not allow a massacre." Jonah laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. "Your ministry sent you here to poke a sleeping bear, lady. You really think they didn't know the bear had claws?" They crawled out of the shaft in silence, emerging into a small auxiliary cargo bay that had remained sealed and pressurized. It was filled with crates of mining explosives and replacement drill heads. Lirith immediately went to a wall console, bypassing the lock with a spark of her gauntlet tool. "I am boosting the signal gain. I need to reach the silent prayer or the fleet relay." Static washed over the speakers. Then, voices, fragmented, panicked, and overlapping. Heavy interference, multiple contacts exiting hyperspace. By the void. Look at the size of them. "Command. This is Strike Leader Varus. Grounded. Storm damage critical. Request extraction. Disregard extraction. Varus. Hold position. Asset denial is priority. Repeat. Asset denial." Lirith froze. That last voice. It wasn't Varus. It was High Minister Kalen's aide. "Asset denial," Lirith whispered. "That means no witnesses. Sounds like your boss and my boss went to the same management seminar," Jonah said, leaning against a crate of drill bits. He was pale, clutching his side. Lirith spun the dial, searching for more. She found a side channel, encrypted with a cipher she recognized. Her own family's private key. Lirith is likely collateral, regrettable. But if the beacon triggers the Terran response, the pretext for the sector blockade is established. The sacrifice is noted. The transmission cut off as the storm outside flared, drowning the signal in white noise. Lirith stood there, her hand hovering over the console. Her bioluminescence dimmed until she was almost gray, the vibrant violet draining away into a dull, shocked slate color. "They knew," she said, her voice trembling. "They knew about the SOS. They sent me to trigger it." "They wanted a war," Jonah said softly. "And nothing starts a war faster than a dead Cathari noblewoman on a human frontier station." Lirith turned away from the console. She looked small suddenly. The armor, the weapons, the arrogance, it all seemed too heavy for her. She swayed. "Hey!" Jonah pushed himself off the crate. He took a step toward her, then stopped. A dark stain was spreading across the side of her bodysuit, just under the ribs. "You're bleeding." Lirith looked down, touching her side. Her fingers came away wet with violet fluid. "The decompression. I think I struck a flange on the way out." "Sit down," Jonah ordered, his voice shifting back to medic mode. He pointed to a clear spot on the floor. "Sit. Now." Lirith sank to the floor, too shocked to argue. Jonah knelt beside her. He pulled a med kit from his thigh pocket, basic human issue, but bandages were universal. "I need to open the seal," Jonah said, his hands hovering over the tear in her suit. Is that okay?" Lirith looked at him. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for any sign of malice. She saw only concentration. "Do it!" Jonah carefully peeled back the torn polymer of her suit. The wound was a jagged gash, oozing bioluminescent blood. It wasn't deep, but it was ugly. "It needs a sealant and a stitch," Jonah muttered. He pulled out a tube of biogel. "This is going to sting. Or whatever the Cathari equivalent of stinging is." He applied the gel. Liriath hissed, her back arching. Her hand shot out and gripped Jonah's shoulder, her claws digging into his flight suit. "Breathe," Jonah said gently. "Just breathe. I've got you." He worked quickly, his hands steady despite the exhaustion. He cleaned the wound, applied the clotting agent, and sealed the suit with thermal tape. As he worked, Liriath watched him. She watched the way his brow furrowed, the way his hands, rough, scarred hands that she had been told were only good for destruction, moved with surprising tenderness. "There," Jonah said, sitting back on his heels. "You'll live, assuming the fleet doesn't nuke us." He went to stand up, but his back seized. A spasm of pain shot through his spine, visible enough that his whole body jerked. He groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. "Your neural interface," Liriath said. She hadn't let go of his shoulder. "It is rejecting the feedback from the station crash." "Old war injury," Jonah gasped through gritted teeth. "Cheap military install. It acts up when the EM field goes haywire." "Turn around," Liriath commanded. "What?" "Turn around. Jonah." It was the first time she had used his name. Jonah hesitated, then slowly turned his back to her. Liriath reached out. Her fingers were long and cool. She touched the base of his neck, where the metal jack met the flesh. "The resonance frequency is misaligned," she murmured. "It is creating a feedback loop in your nervous system. I can dampen it." She didn't use a tool. She used her own bioelectric field. Jonah felt a strange, cool, tingling sensation spread from her fingertips into his spine. It felt like ice water poured over a burn. The cramping muscles relaxed. The sharp, stabbing pain faded into a dull throb. "Better?" she asked softly, her hand lingering on the back of his neck for a second longer than necessary. "Yeah," Jonah breathed, turning back around to face her. "Yeah. Much better." They sat there in the dim light of the auxiliary bay, surrounded by the tools of mining and death. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was fragile. Liriath looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the scars on his arms not as marks of violence, but as a map of survival. She saw the tiredness in his eyes and recognized it, because she felt it too. The exhaustion of being a pawn, the exhaustion of always looking over your shoulder. Jonah leaned his head back against the wall, feigning sleep. But he was hyper-aware of her presence. He watched her through the veil of his lashes, the way the faint bioluminescence of her skin pulsed in a slow, rhythmic beat, syncing with her breathing. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a target. She was just a person, scared and hurt, trapped in a room with the only other living soul who gave a damn if she lived or died. "Jonah," she whispered. "If we survive this," she trailed off. "If we survive this," Jonah murmured, "I'm going to buy you a drink. And then I'm going to explain to you why pastry metaphors are actually a sign of affection in some cultures." A small, quiet laugh escaped her lips. It was a beautiful sound in the dead air of the outpost. "I would like that," she said. She drew her knees up to her chest, watching him until his breathing evened out. But neither of them slept. They just breathed, sharing the recycled air, waiting for the monsters to arrive. The arrival of the United Terran Authority fleet was not an event of grace. It was a geological trauma, space, usually a silent void, seemed to buckle under the sudden displacement of mass. One moment, the sky above Orpheus 7 was a swirling soup of bruised auroras and storm clouds. The next, it was filled with the jagged, brutal silhouettes of heavy cruisers dropping out of faster-than-light travel. They arrived with the sonic boom of godhammers striking an anvil, a thunderclap that propagated even through the thin atmosphere of the moon, shaking the dust from the rafters of the outpost. Jonah Rhee felt the vibration in his teeth. He knew that sound. It was the sound of the cavalry arriving, not to save the hostage, but to level the building. "They are here," Liriath whispered. She was still sitting on the floor of the auxiliary bay, her hand pressed over the patch Jonah had placed on her side. Her bioluminescence had gone completely dark, an involuntary camouflage reflex. "Stay down," Jonah said, his voice rough. "Do not move. Do not raise your hands unless I tell you to. And for the love of God, do not activate your shields. I am an officer of the Cathari." She started, her voice trembling with a fragile attempt at dignity. "You are a biological anomaly in a kill zone," Jonah snapped, stepping in front of her. "To them, you are just a target signature." The ceiling of the auxiliary bay disintegrated. There was no warning, no polite knock. Shaped charges blew the maintenance hatch inward, followed instantly by flashbang grenades that turned the dim room into a blinding white supernova. Jonah squeezed his eyes shut and turned away, hands up, screaming the identification code he hadn't used in 10 years. "Friendly, ID 49 Alpha 0, Engineer Rhee, friendly." The room filled with the heavy, rhythmic thud of magnetic boots hitting the deck. The air smelled of cordite and aggressive propellants. "Target secure. Left flank clear. Biosign confirmed. 1 human, 1 Xeno. Suppressing." Jonah was slammed against the wall. An armored gauntlet pinned his neck, driving the breath out of him. He didn't fight it. He went limp, knowing that any resistance would be met with a shattered bone. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the whine of a stun baton discharging. "No!" Jonah gagged, trying to turn his head. He saw Liriath. She hadn't fought. She had tried to stand, perhaps to surrender, but 3 Marines in heavy void pattern power armor were already on her. The stun baton struck her shoulder, the electric arc distinctively blue and vicious. Liriath convulsed, a silent scream frozen on her face as her nervous system overloaded. She collapsed, her violet skin flushing a sickening gray. "She is a non-combatant," Jonah choked out, clawing at the hand on his throat. "She surrendered. Secure that asset." A new voice cut through the chaos. It was cool, sharp, and utterly devoid of adrenaline. The Marine holding Jonah stepped back, saluting sharply. Jonah slid down the wall, coughing, fighting to get air back into his bruised larynx. He looked up to see a woman striding through the smoke. Commander Ava Maddox wore the dress uniform of the Terran Navy Fleet Command, pristine and terrifyingly out of place amidst the wreckage. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a scalpel made of ice. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Jonah with the dispassionate interest of a biologist examining a specimen, before flicking to Liriath's unconscious form. "Engineer Rhee," Maddox said. Her voice was smooth. "You triggered the dead hand." "I didn't," Jonah rasped, pulling himself to his feet. He gestured to Liriath, who was being zip-tied with brutal efficiency by the Marines. "The system triggered itself. She tried to stop it. She saved my life." Maddox raised an eyebrow. "Did she? Or did she realize she had walked into a trap and tried to mitigate the damage?" "She is an intelligence officer," Jonah insisted, his heart hammering. "She has data. She knows why they were sent here. You can't just treat her like a bug hunt trophy." Maddox walked over to Liriath. She reached down, tilting Lirith's chin up with a gloved finger. Lirith's eyes were rolling back, groggy, but she was starting to come around. A Ketheri shadow walker, Maddox mused. High-value prisoner. Good. That simplifies the narrative. She turned back to Jonah. Get cleaned up. Ree, you look like a disaster. I want a full debrief in the command center in 20 minutes. And Ree? What? Jonah spat. You are a hero now, Maddox said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Try to act like one. The news feeds are already running the story of your brave stand against the alien invasion. The command center of Outpost 4 Alpha had been transformed. The quiet, dusty solitude Jonah had known for 3 years was gone, replaced by a hive of tactical displays, shouting technicians, and the hum of military-grade portable servers. Jonah sat in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt copper. He had refused the medical bay, settling for a quick spray of analgesic on his back. His eyes were fixed on the observation window that looked into the adjacent briefing room, now a makeshift interrogation cell. Lirith sat on a metal chair bolted to the floor. Her armor had been stripped away, leaving her in the thin, torn bodysuit. Her wrists were cuffed to the table. She looked bruised, exhausted, and incredibly small, surrounded by the burly human intelligence officers looming over her. But she wasn't breaking. Jonah tapped into the audio feed, a trick he had managed by splicing his datapad into the room's maintenance override. He shouldn't be listening. If Maddox knew, she would have him court-martialed. He didn't care. Name and rank, the interrogator barked. He was a thick-necked man who clearly enjoyed his job too much. Lirith looked up. Her bioluminescence flared a soft, amused pink. She tilted her head, a predator studying prey. I am Lirith of House Vane, she purred, her voice husky but steady. And you, I assume, are the entertainment? I must say, human hospitality lacks a certain finesse. The handcuffs are catastrophic for one's circulation. This isn't a game. Zeno! The interrogator slammed his hand on the table. You attacked a sovereign Terran outpost. That is an act of war. An act of war? Lirith laughed softly. Darling, if I wanted war, your little moon would be dust. I came for a hard drive. It is hardly my fault your antique alarm system is so temperamental. Tell me, do you always greet guests with orbital bombardment, or am I special? Jonah watched her mesmerized. She was terrified. He could see the slight tremor in her hands that she hid by clasping them together. But she was weaponizing every stereotype the humans held about her kind. She played the arrogant, decadent alien noblewoman to perfection, deflecting their aggression with wit and flirtatious sarcasm. We know your fleet is massing in Sector 9, the interrogator pressed. We are Cathari, Lirith smirked. We do not mass, we congregate, usually for cocktails. Speaking of which, is there any chance of a drink? My throat is parched. Jonah let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. She was buying time. She was keeping them talking, keeping them focused on her attitude rather than her intel. Bishop, Jonah whispered into his collar mic. I am here. Jonah. The AI responded. Bishop sounded different, cleaner, sharper. The military had evidently scrubbed his personality subroutines, but the core loyalty to the station engineer remained deep in the kernel. Can you push a text string to the interrogation room? Sub-visual spectrum, projected on the table surface where only she can see it. That is a violation of 57 separate security protocols. Bishop noted. Do it. Sending. Inside the room, Lirith paused mid-insult. Her eyes flicked down to the metal table. There, shimmering faintly in a frequency only her enhanced spectrum vision could catch, were words. I am listening. Trust me. Give me access to your ship's logs. I can prove we were set up. Liriath's expression didn't change. She didn't blink. She slowly looked up at the mirror glass, directly at where Jonah was sitting. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. You want the truth? Liriath said aloud, leaning back. Fine, but I am bored of talking to grunts. I will only unlock the encryption on my ship's flight recorder for someone who actually understands the math. Send in the engineer. Maddox wasn't happy about it, but the logic held. Jonah was the only one on station with the legacy code knowledge to interface with the damaged Cathari systems without tripping a data purge. They were set up in the server room, at separate terminals. Liriath was still cuffed, guarded by 2 Marines with pulse rifles. Jonah sat 10 feet away, typing furiously. I am bridging the connection, Jonah said loudly for the benefit of the guards. She is inputting the biometric key now. Liriath placed her hand on the sensor pad. Her skin glowed, the light flowing into the machine. On Jonah's screen, the data began to scroll. It was a flood of telemetry, mission orders, and sensor logs from the silent prayer. Keep the guards distracted, Jonah typed into the command line chat window hidden behind the code stream. They are looking at my neck ridges. Liriath typed back instantly. I think the tall one finds me exotic. It is tragic. Focus. Look at the timestamps on your mission profile. Jonah highlighted a block of code. Liriath studied it on her screen. Her eyes narrowed. The orders, she typed. They were downloaded to my ship 3 days before the minister even briefed me. Exactly, Jonah replied. And look at this. Terran fleet movement logs. Maddox's battle group was already in FTL jump prep 12 hours before your team breached our hull. They weren't reacting to the SOS. Liriath, they were waiting for it. We were the trigger, Liriath realized. My government sent me to die to justify a war. Your government left the door unlocked to invite me in. It's a honeypot, Jonah typed, his fingers flying. This outpost isn't a mine. It's a mousetrap. The Deathworlder SOS was never meant to be retired. They left it active because they knew if a Cathari unit triggered it, the existential threat label would give them legal clearance to annex this entire sector. Collusion, Liriath typed. High-level players on both sides. They want the border wiped clean. If we don't get this data out, Jonah wrote, they are going to glass this moon to hide the evidence. And you are going to be the headline, the alien monster who started the war. Engineer Ree, Maddox's voice cut in over the intercom. Status? Do we have the target packages? Jonah minimized the chat window instantly. Almost, Commander. The encryption is Quinun dense. I need another hour to isolate the navigation subroutines. You have 30 minutes, Maddox clipped. Transport leaves for the black site at 1900 hours. The power fluctuation happened 20 minutes later. It wasn't an accident. Jonah had routed the Outpost's heat exchange into the primary capacitor bank. It was a clumsy brute force hack that caused the lights in the brig sector to stroke violently and the electronic locks to cycle for a fraction of a second. Security alert, the automated voice droned. Grid instability. I'll check the breaker, Jonah yelled to the guards outside Liriath's holding cell. Don't shoot anything. He slipped into the cell before the backup generators kicked in. The room was bathed in dim, emergency blue light. Liriath was standing in the center of the small space, rubbing her wrists. She looked up as he entered, her posture shifting from exhaustion to instant alertness. You are insane, she whispered. If they find you in here, I'm checking the restraints, Jonah said loudly, winking at her. He moved closer, dropping his voice. We have to move fast. Maddox is shipping you out. You know what a black site is? I can guess, Lirith said, her voice bitter. A place where people cease to be people and become biology experiments. Worse, it's a hole where they bury the truth. Jonah checked the door sensor. It was blocked. They had a minute, maybe two. Why are you doing this, Jonah? Lirith asked. She took a step toward him. The sarcasm was gone. Her face was open, raw. You are safe. You are a hero. You could walk away. I don't walk away, Jonah said. He looked at her, really looked at her. The violet of her skin was softer in the low light, the bioluminescent markings tracing the line of her jaw like living constellations. And I don't like being used. Is that all? Lirith challenged. Just professional pride? No, Jonah admitted. It's because they called you a monster. Lirith let out a sharp, ragged breath. I am a monster, Jonah. Look at me. I kill for a living. I serve an empire that treats sentient lives like currency. And your people. By the void. Your people are worse. We're terrified, Jonah said, stepping closer. You said it yourself. That is why you are terrifying, Lirith hissed. She didn't back away. She moved into his space, her eyes burning. You humans, you feel too much. You fight with this desperate, starving intensity, and it scares us. We fight for duty, for honor. You fight because you are angry at the universe for existing. She reached out, her fingers curling into the fabric of his flight suit, gripping the rough material. You look at me, Lirith whispered, her voice trembling, and you do not see an enemy. You see something broken. And because you are a Deathworlder, because you are born from a world that hurts you, your only instinct is to fix it. Maybe I just like the challenge, Jonah murmured. They were inches apart now. The air between them was thick, charged with the ozone smell of the station and the electric scent of her skin. Jonah could feel the heat radiating off her. He could see the pulse beating frantically in the hollow of her throat. She wasn't trembling from fear. She was trembling from the sheer, overwhelming proximity. Lirith looked up at him, her lips parted. The political games, the war, the fleet outside, it all faded. There was just the man who had dragged her out of the vacuum, and the woman who had stabilized his spine with a touch. Jonah's hand rose, hovering near her face. He wanted to touch her. He wanted to trace the line of light under her eye. He wanted to bridge the gap between their species and prove that the galaxy was wrong about both of them. Lirith leaned in, her eyes fluttering shut. Jonah froze. The reality of their situation crashed back in. If he touched her, if he crossed that line, he compromised everything. He needed to be the engineer. He needed to be the one man Maddox trusted enough to ignore. He pulled back. It took every ounce of willpower he possessed. Lirith's eyes snapped open. Hurt flashed across her face, raw and immediate, followed instantly by a mask of cool composure slamming back into place. We can't, Jonah whispered, his voice hoarse. Not here. Not while you're in chains. Lirith released his shirt. She smoothed the front of her bodysuit, her hands shaking. You are right. Of course, the professionalism. Lirith, Jonah said, the ache in his chest sharp. That's not what I meant. Go, she said, turning her back to him. Fix the breaker, engineer, before the guards get suspicious. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a throbbing undercurrent of unsaid words and unfinished actions. It hung between them, heavy and unsatisfied. Jonah stared at her back for a second, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the defiance in her posture. Then he turned and forced the door open. Restraints are secure, Jonah announced to the guards outside, his voice flat. Power is cycling back on. An hour later, Jonah stood on the observation deck, watching a heavy transport shuttle dock with the Outpost. It was an ugly, blocky ship painted in matte stealth coating, no markings. A black site rendition craft. Commander Maddox stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back. "Efficient work. She said. The decryption provided excellent targeting data for the fleet. We are preparing to strike the Cathari forward bases in the morning." "She's just one officer," Jonah said, staring at the shuttle. "She doesn't know anything about the high command." "It doesn't matter what she knows," Maddox replied coldly. "It matters what we can say she knows. She is a symbol. We capture the monster. We parade her. We justify the budget." Maddox turned to him, her eyes sharp. "You should be proud. You helped secure the safety of the human race today." Jonah looked at the shuttle. He thought of the messages he sent to his family that were never returned. He thought of the scars on his arms. He thought of Lyriath's fingers curled in his shirt, the desperate honesty in her voice when she called him terrifying because he cared too much. He realized then that he was done being safe. He was done being the lonely man on the lonely rock. "Yes, Commander," Jonah lied, his face a mask of obedience. "I'm just doing my job," Maddox nodded and walked away. As soon as she was gone, Jonah turned and sprinted toward the engineering bay. He wasn't going to let that shuttle leave. He was going to break every regulation, every law, and every oath he had ever taken. He tapped his comms. "Bishop." "Jonah?" "Lock out the command codes," Jonah ordered, grabbing his welding torch and a satchel of mining charges. "Isolate the hangar bay and get the backup life support ready on the Cathari cruiser." "Jonah," Bishop warned, "this is treason." "No," Jonah said, checking the charge on his stun baton. "This is a rescue mission. We're going to catch a ghost." He moved into the dark corridors, no longer the tired veteran, but a Deathworlder going to war for the one thing the galaxy told him he wasn't allowed to have. The command code Jonah typed into the environmental control console was not strictly illegal, but it was certainly against manufacturer recommendations. He called it the Monday Morning Protocol. "Bishop," Jonah said into his comms, his voice low as he watched the two Marines guarding the brig corridor on the security feed. "On my mark, initiate system test 4-9. And Bishop, ignore all safety overrides for the next 10 minutes. I am required to inform you that this will result in significant nausea for station personnel," the AI replied, its voice crisp. "Also, the gravity plating in Sector 4 has a wobble that might become projectile." "That is the point," Jonah muttered. "Mark." The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Outpost 4 Alpha did not explode, it hiccuped. The lighting system, usually a sterile, steady white, began to strobe violently between emergency red and a festive, seizure-inducing disco blue. Simultaneously, the artificial gravity generator skipped a beat, dropped to 0 for 3 seconds, and then slammed back on at 1.5 times standard weight. On the security monitor, the two Marines were lifted off their feet, floated in confusion, and were then slammed hard into the deck plating when the gravity surged. As they groaned, trying to stand under the oppressive weight, the automated door system began to malfunction. The brig door labeled Cell 3 suddenly announced it was laundry service and slid open, while the door to the guard station sealed itself and declared it was an airlock venting sequence. "Warning," the station speakers blared. "Atmospheric anomalies detected in the restroom. Please evacuate to the nearest vending machine." Jonah didn't wait. He sprinted around the corner, his boots thudding heavily against the floor. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who knew exactly when the gravity wave would crest and trough. The Marines were still disoriented, one of them vomiting into his helmet. Jonah didn't stun them. He didn't have to. He simply stepped over them, grabbed the key card from the belt of the groaning sergeant, and swiped it across the reader of the cell door. Lyriath was already standing. She had felt the gravity shift and knew it wasn't a glitch. She knew it was an invitation. "You took your time," she said, stepping out of the cell. She was still in the torn bodysuit, her armor gone, but her eyes were bright with adrenaline. "I had to wait for the spin cycle," Jonah said, tossing her a stolen technician's jacket. "Put this on. We are leaving." "The shuttle?" Lyriath asked, pulling the oversized, grease-stained jacket over her lithe frame. "No," Jonah said, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the service ladder. "We are taking your ship. My ride is a government transport. Your ride has guns." They moved into the infrastructure of the station, slipping into the narrow spaces between the inner and outer hulls. This was Jonah's world. He knew every conduit, every rusted valve, every bypass. He led her through steam-filled tunnels and over precarious catwalks where the dark abyss of the ventilation shafts dropped away for hundreds of meters. Lyriath moved differently, where Jonah scrambled and muscled his way through tight squeezes. She flowed, even without her armor. She was a creature of predatory grace. She leaped over gaps that made Jonah hesitate, landing silently on the balls of her feet, her violet skin glowing softly in the shadows. "Patrol ahead," Lyriath whispered, freezing mid-step on a gantry above the loading docks. Jonah crouched beside her. Below them, a squad of Maddox's shock troops was sweeping the hangar, their weapon lights cutting through the fog. "They are guarding the main airlock," Jonah whispered. "Standard procedure." "Then we create a new door," Lyriath said. She pointed to a waste disposal chute on the far wall. "That tube feeds directly into the debris field reclamation net. It will dump us right next to my ship's docking clamp." "It is a garbage chute," Jonah hissed. "It ejects plasma slag at 300 degrees. "The smelters are offline," Lyriath countered, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "I checked the power grid while you were playing with the lights. It is cold. And it is the only way." She didn't wait for his agreement. She vaulted over the railing, dropping 20 feet to land on the disposal machinery. Jonah cursed softly, looked at the heavily armed soldiers below, and jumped after her. They slid down the chute in total darkness, the metal slick with industrial residue. They tumbled out into the vacuum-shielded reclamation net, landing in a pile of shredded alloy and dust. The silent prayer loomed above them. It looked like a wounded beast. The hull was scorched. One of the engine nacelles was dark, and the stealth coating was pitted with micrometeorite impacts. But the airlock cycled open as they approached, a ramp extending like a tongue. Jonah followed Lyriath up the ramp, his hand hovering near the stun baton on his belt. The interior of the Cathari ship was cool, smelling of lavender and ozone. "Hold!" a voice snapped. A Cathari male stepped out of the shadows of the airlock antechamber. He was slight, wiry, and held a very large, very unstable-looking plasma caster leveled at Jonah's chest. His skin was a pale indigo, and his eyes were narrow slits of suspicion. "Kale," Lyriath breathed, stepping in front of Jonah. "Stand down." "I see you brought a souvenir," Kale said, his gaze not leaving Jonah. "Did we run out of ration bars? Is he for eating?" "He is the reason we are not currently frozen vapor," Lyriath said, pushing the weapon barrel down. "He is with me." Kale looked at Jonah, then back at Lyriath. A slow, sharp grin spread across his face. "A pet Deathworlder. Mother always said you had strange tastes." "Lyriath. But this is ambitious." "Does he bite?" "Only when provoked," Jonah said dryly, stepping forward and offering a hand. "Jonah Ree. Engineer. I fixed your life support remotely 2 hours ago. You're welcome." Kale stared at the human hand, then snorted and holstered his weapon. You fixed the tertiary loop. I had to recalibrate the primary myself, but adequate work for a primate. We are leaving, Learith commanded, moving toward the bridge. Kale, get the reactor online. We need to be gone before the Terran fleet realizes we are not just space debris. Way ahead of you, Kale called out, running back to his console. Hold on to something. This is going to be a messy launch. The silent prayer detached from the station with a violent shudder. There were no clearance codes, no flight plans. Kale simply blew the docking bolts and gunned the thrusters. The ship shot away from Orpheus A7's, diving into the chaotic swirl of the moon's ring system, using the ice and rock as cover against the Terran sensors. The adrenaline faded slowly, leaving behind a jagged, trembling exhaustion. Jonah stood in the captain's quarters of the silent prayer. It was a small room, austere but elegant, with walls that hummed with the ship's biological rhythm. Learith was pacing, her hands moving in agitated patterns as she argued with the air. We cannot go to Cathari Prime, she said, turning to face him. If the Ministry was willing to sacrifice me to start a war, they will not hesitate to finish the job to keep their secrets. I am a loose end. Jonah. And we can't go to Earth, Jonah countered, leaning against the bulkhead. Maddox has likely already flagged me as a traitor. If I show up in Sol system airspace, I'll be vaporized before I can open a hailing frequency. Then where? Lyria threw her hands up. We are two people in a broken ship, squeezed between two empires that want us dead. There is nowhere. There has to be somewhere, Jonah said stubbornly. We have the data. We have the proof. Proof means nothing if no one listens, Lyriath shouted. She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes wide and wet. Do you not understand? They do not care about the truth. They care about power. We are just dust. We are dust in the wind of their ambition. We are not dust, Jonah said, stepping away from the wall. We are the ones who know. And look where that got us. Lyriath gestured to the room, to the ship, to the galaxy outside that wanted to kill them. You lost your home. You lost your safety. You threw away your life for what? For me. Why would you do that? Because you were worth it, Jonah said. The words came out before he could filter them. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. Lyriath stared at him. The anger drained out of her face, replaced by a stunned vulnerability. She took a step toward him. You are a fool, she whispered, a dangerous, reckless, human fool. I know, Jonah said. You terrify me, she said, her voice shaking. You act without calculation, you save your enemy, you break your own laws, you make no sense. I make perfect sense, Jonah said, his voice dropping to a rough murmur. I just don't like bullies. He was close enough to touch her now. He could see the faint pulse of light in her neck ridges. He could smell the rain scent of her skin, the tension that had been building since the airlock, since the maintenance shaft, since the moment he dragged her out of the vacuum. Finally snapped. Lyriath surged forward. She didn't move with her usual grace. She moved with desperation. Her hands grabbed the lapels of his stolen jacket, and she pulled him down. They collided more than kissed. It was messy, frantic, and fierce. It was the taste of survival. Jonah's hands found her waist, pulling her flush against him, anchoring her. Lyriath's fingers tangled in his hair, her claws scraping gently against his scalp. It wasn't soft. It was a release of terror and fury and a sudden, overwhelming need to confirm that they were both still warm, still breathing, still alive. The kiss deepened, crossing the line they had drawn in the cell, shattering the professional distance they had tried to maintain. For a moment, there was no war, There was no conspiracy. There was only the heat of her mouth and the solid, grounding weight of his arms. Then, the ship lurched as Cale engaged the FTL drive. They broke apart, chests heaving, eyes wide. Lyriath stared at him, her lips swollen, her bioluminescence flaring a brilliant, flushed gold. Jonah leaned his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "Okay," Jonah whispered. "Okay." Lyriath swallowed hard. She placed her hands on his chest, pushing him back half an inch, not away, just back. "Not now," she said, her voice trembling. "We cannot. I cannot do this while we are running. I cannot lose you. And if I let myself have this, the fear of losing it will paralyze me." "I know," Jonah said, covering her hands with his own. "We need to survive first." "Yes." Lyriath nodded, though she didn't pull her hands away. "Survival first. Then we figure out what this is." "Deal," Jonah said. He squeezed her hands, then stepped back, putting a respectable distance between them. "So, if we can't go home, and we can't stay here, we go to the middle." Lyriath took a deep breath, composing herself. The gold faded to a steady, resolute violet. "Helix 9. The trade hub?" "The sinkhole," Lyriath corrected. "It is a neutral station in the border zone. Smugglers, information brokers, spies who have lost their masters. If there is anyone who can help us leak this data to the public without getting us killed, they are on Helix 9. "Helix 9 it is," Jonah said. "I'll go tell Cale to set a course." "Jonah," Lyriath called out as he reached the door. He turned. She was standing in the center of the room, looking at him with a gaze that was both fierce and tender. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet." Jonah grinned, a crooked, tired expression. "We still have to survive the coffee on this ship." The journey to Helix 9 took 4 standard days. It was a time of quiet transition, a montage of small moments played out against the backdrop of the infinite void. They spent hours on the bridge, the star field stretching out before them in a blur of warp distortion. Lyriath taught Jonah how to read the Cathari navigational charts, which were based not on grid coordinates but on stellar currents, gravitational rivers that flowed between the stars. "You see the drift?" Lyriath pointed to a swirling eddy on the holographic display. Her arm brushed against his shoulder, a casual contact that sent a jolt of electricity through him. "The mass of the binary system creates a downstream pull. You do not fight it. You ride it. It's like sailing," Jonah mused, watching the display. "Old Earth sailing. You use the wind." "Precise," Lyriath nodded. "Humans try to punch through space with brute force. We prefer to flow with it." Later, in the galley, the roles were reversed. Jonah was introducing Lyriath to the horrors of human instant rations. "This," Jonah said, presenting a steaming mug, "is coffee, or at least a powder that remembers what coffee used to taste like." Lyriath took the mug cautiously. She sniffed it, her nose wrinkled. "It smells like burnt chemical waste." "That's the flavor profile," Jonah encouraged. "Drink up. It wakes you up." She took a sip. Her eyes went wide. She gagged, covering her mouth with her hand, forcing herself to swallow. "By the void!" she rasped, staring at the cup in horror. "That is a weapon. You drink this voluntarily?" "Every morning," Jonah said, taking a sip from his own cup with a satisfied sigh. "It builds character. It builds ulcers," Cale chimed in from the doorway, munching on a nutrient stick. "I like him, Lyriath. He poisons himself for efficiency. It is very pragmatic." There were moments of silence, too. Jonah would wake up from a nightmare of the war, sweating and shaking, and find Liriath sitting in the common area, staring out at the stars. He wouldn't say anything. He would just sit beside her. She would lean her head on his shoulder, and they would watch the universe rush by. Two fugitives finding a strange, domestic peace in the eye of the hurricane. Helix 9 was not a place you went to be found. It was a place you went to disappear. It was a massive, sprawling station built into a hollowed-out asteroid. It was a chaotic tangle of docking rings, neon signage, and jury-rigged habitat modules. As the silent prayer docked, using a falsified ID code Jonah had cobbled together, the view from the viewport was a sensory overload of flashing lights and holographic advertisements for gambling dens, pleasure houses, and black market gene clinics. Charming, Jonah muttered as they walked down the docking ramp. He had swapped his flight suit for a nondescript heavy coat, while Liriath wore a hooded cloak that shadowed her face and hid her glowing markings. "Keep your head down," Liriath warned, her voice low. "The air here is expensive, and trust is non-existent." They moved through the station's lower levels, a district known as the Sprawl. The air was thick with smoke, tobacco, spice vapor, and things that smelled like burning plastic. The noise was a constant thrum of music, shouting voices in a dozen languages, and the clanking of machinery. They pushed through a crowded market where vendors sold everything from salvaged drive cores to illegal memory implants. Liriath navigated the crowd with practiced ease, dodging a drunken Tellarite miner and a hovering drone advertising discreet bodily disposal. "We are meeting a contact at the Neon Lotus," Liriath said. "He is an information broker. He owes me a favor." "A favor?" Jonah asked, eyeing a group of mercenaries cleaning their weapons at a street food stall. "What kind of favor?" "I chose not to kill him once," Liriath said simply. "It was a significant gift." The Neon Lotus was a bar carved into the rock of the asteroid. The lighting was low and red, obscured by thick clouds of vapor. Holographic dancers of various species and impossible anatomies gyrated on platforms above the patrons. They found a booth in the back. A moment later, a small, rodent-like alien with 4 eyes and nervous hands slid into the seat opposite them. "Liriath," the broker hissed, his voice a series of clicks and whistles that Jonah's universal translator struggled to parse. "You are bold or stupid. The bounty on your head is substantial." "Hello, Bax," Liriath said, lowering her hood just enough for him to see her eyes. "I am not here to sell. I am here to buy and to trade." She placed a data chip on the table. It contained a sample of the logs Jonah and she had decrypted. Bax picked it up, slotting it into a port behind his ear. His eyes widened, all 4 of them blinking out of sync. "This," Bax whispered, "this is dangerous data, high yield, but radioactive. If I touch this, the Terran Authority will burn my shop, and the Cathari Ministry will skin me." "We need the network," Jonah said, leaning forward. "We need to know who is funding the escalation, who benefits from the war." Bax looked at Jonah, then back at Liriath. "The human asks big questions. Fine. For the sake of our history." He tapped a sequence into the table surface. A holographic web appeared, spinning between them. "It is not just governments," Bax explained, pointing to nodes on the web. "It is a consortium, Terran defense contractors, Cathari resource guilds. They have been losing profit margins since the peace treaties. They needed a catalyst, a new frontier war to justify the next generation of fleet spending." "The Outpost," Jonah realized, staring at the web. It wasn't just bait. It was a product demo. They triggered the SOS to show how dangerous space is so they could sell the solution. "Precisely," Bax clicked. "Fear is the currency. Safety is the product. You two, you are just the glitch in the marketing campaign. Liriath stared at the hologram. They killed my squad, she whispered, her voice cold. They killed brave soldiers to boost their quarterly projections. It is the way of the galaxy. Bax shrugged. Fear keeps people safe, or so they say. No, Liriath said, looking up. Her eyes met Jonah's. Fear is what they sell. It is easy. It is cheap. And love? Bax sneered, sensing the tension between them. Is love the answer? Jonah reached under the table and took Liriath's hand. He squeezed it, hard. Love is inconvenient, Jonah said, looking at the broker. It's irrational. It makes you do stupid things like break into prisons and fly into asteroid fields. It doesn't follow orders. Liriath looked at him, and for the first time since the crash, she smiled, a real, unburdened smile. And that, she said, is why they cannot control it. Suddenly, Bax's eyes snapped wide. He pulled the data chip from his head and threw it back at them. Leave, he hissed. Now. What? Jonah asked. My perimeter sensors just tripped. Bax scrambled out of the booth. Mercenaries, Terran private military, and Cathari shadows, they are here together. Together? Liriath stood up, her hand going to the concealed pistol at her hip. The consortium, Jonah realized. They aren't fighting each other. They're cleaning up the loose ends. The front door of the bar exploded inward. Go! Bax shouted, disappearing into a secret panel in the wall. Jonah flipped the heavy table over, dragging Liriath down behind it just as the air filled with the sizzling snap of plasma fire and the roar of kinetic slugs. So much for the neutral zone, Jonah yelled over the noise of shattering glass. There is no neutral zone, Liriath shouted back, pulling her weapon. There is only us. She popped up, firing 2 precise shots. A mercenary screamed and fell. Ready to run? Jonah asked, looking toward the kitchen exit. Always, Liriath said. They moved together, a seamless unit now, running not from the war, but toward the truth, hand in hand through the smoke and the neon fire. The chaotic strobe of plasma fire turned the smoky interior of the Neon Lotus into a disorienting nightmare of flashing red and violent violet. The neutral zone had shattered. The mercenary squad that had breached the front entrance was not moving with the clumsy aggression of bar-room brawlers. They moved with the synchronized lethality of a hit team. Jonah Rhee flipped a heavy plasteel table onto its side, sparks showering over his head as a kinetic slug disintegrated against the improvised cover. Beside him, Liriath was a blur of motion, her pulse pistol snapping off shots with a rhythm that was almost musical. The back exit is compromised, Liriath shouted over the roar of the crowd and the sizzling whine of energy weapons. I saw heat signatures through the wall. Cathari Shadow Guard. Great, Jonah yelled back, checking the charge on his stun baton. A joint task force. It is touching to see our governments finally working together to kill us. We need elevation, Liriath commanded. The ventilation grid above the bar. Can you reach it? Jonah looked up. The ceiling was 20 feet of smoke and hanging holographic projectors. If you can cover me for 5 seconds. I will give you 3, Liriath said. She broke cover. Instead of retreating, she surged forward, sliding across the slick floor on her knees, firing both of her pistols in a suppressing arc. The mercenaries ducked, forced back by the sheer audacity of the move. Jonah didn't waste the opening. He scrambled up a stack of cargo crates, his boots finding purchase on the slick metal, and launched himself at the swaying lighting rig. He swung, muscles screaming, and kicked the ventilation grate open. Liriath, move! She was already moving. She holstered one weapon, sprinted toward the crates, and leaped. Jonah caught her forearm, a grip that was becoming as familiar to him as his own heartbeat, and hauled her up into the darkness of the shaft just as the crate she had jumped from exploded into shrapnel. They scrambled through the dusty ductwork, emerging onto a maintenance catwalk high above the station's promenade. Helix 9 was a spinning cylinder, and here, near the central spine, the gravity was disorienting, pulling them sideways as much as downwards. "They are tracking our comm signatures," Jonah gasped, leaning against a rusted stanchion. "We need to go dark." "If we go dark, we lose contact with Kale and the ship," Lyriath countered, her chest heaving. "And we are going to need an extraction." As if summoned by her words, the door at the far end of the catwalk blew inward. A squad of armored figures poured through, humans in heavy void armor and Cathari in sleek, shifting stealth suits. "Target acquired," a mechanical voice boomed. "Sector 4G, lethal force authorized." "Run!" Jonah said. They ran. The chase that followed was a blur of shifting gravity and desperate improvisation. They sprinted through the twisting service corridors of the habitat ring, where the floor curved upward in a relentless loop. The pursuers were gaining. The heavy thud of boots and the silent glide of the Cathari assassins echoed closer. "Dead end!" Lyriath skidded to a halt. The corridor ended in a sealed pressure door. The control panel was smashed, sparks spitting from the exposed circuitry. "I can hotwire it," Jonah said, dropping to his knees and ripping the panel cover off. "Give me 30 seconds. "We do not have 30 seconds, Lyriath said, raising her weapons. She stood in the center of the hallway, her bioluminescence flaring a defiant, blinding white. The first Cathari assassin rounded the curve, a monofilament blade extending from his wrist. He was fast, faster than human eyes could track. But Jonah wasn't just relying on wires. He jammed his multi-tool into the port and accessed the station's local maintenance grid. "Duck!" Jonah screamed. Lyriath dropped instantly. Jonah didn't open the door. Instead, he overrode the safety protocols on the heavy cleaning drones docked in the ceiling alcoves. 3 massive barrel-shaped sanitation bots dropped from the ceiling with the weight of anvils. They didn't have weapons, but they had mass. And they had high-torque scrubbing brushes spinning at 4,000 revolutions per minute. The assassin slammed face first into a spinning abrasive pad. The bot, detecting an obstruction, engaged its stubborn stain removal protocol and drove the assassin into the wall with crushing force. The human mercenaries behind him stumbled, firing wildly as the hallway filled with rogue cleaning machines bouncing off the walls. "The door!" Lyriath yelled, scrambling back to her feet. "Got it!" Jonah crossed 2 wires. The blast door hissed and groaned, sliding open just enough for them to squeeze through. They tumbled into a zero-gravity cargo transfer shaft. The sudden weightlessness was a relief to Lyriath and a wave of nausea for Jonah. "Up!" Lyriath grabbed his belt, kicking off the wall. In 0G, she was a goddess of war. She spun and twisted, pulling Jonah along in her wake, navigating the floating debris of the shaft. They were halfway up the shaft when the hatch above them opened. Kale was there. The Cathari tech specialist was hanging upside down, his legs hooked around a ladder rung, firing a plasma rifle down past them at the pursuing guards. "Hurry up, you flightless birds," Kale shouted. "I have parked the shuttle at the tertiary airlock, but the meter is running." "Kale!" Lyriath reached out, grabbing the ladder. A sniper shot cracked through the shaft. It was a high-velocity railgun round, designed to punch through ship hulls. It missed Lyriath by an inch. It hit Kale. The impact spun him around, shattering his shoulder and throwing him back onto the deck. A spray of violet blood misted the air. "No!" Lyriath screamed, vaulting out of the shaft. She dragged Kale back from the edge, returning fire blindly to suppress the sniper below. Jonah scrambled up behind her, instantly dropping into medic mode. "Pressure," Jonah barked, ripping a strip from his coat and jamming it into the wound. "Hold him down!" Cale's eyes were unfocused, his skin paling to a sickly gray. He coughed, violet froth bubbling at his lips. Did I get them?" Cale wheezed. "You got them," Lyriath said, her voice cracking. "Stay with me. Cale, do not fade." "The shuttle," Cale gasped, his grip on Lyriath's arm weakening. He looked past her, his gaze locking onto Jonah. The suspicion and mockery that had defined their relationship were gone, replaced by a fierce, desperate clarity. "You!" Cale snarled at Jonah, grabbing the front of Jonah's shirt with his good hand. "You take care of her. You hear me? You take care of her. You damn soft-skinned maniac." Jonah looked at the dying alien, seeing the fierce loyalty burning in his eyes. He realized then that he wasn't looking at an enemy. He was looking at a brother in arms who was passing the watch. "I will," Jonah said, his voice solemn. "I promise." Kyle nodded, his eyes sliding shut. "Good. Now, get me to the med bay, before I bleed on the upholstery." He passed out. "He is stable for now," Jonah said, checking the pulse in Cale's neck. "But we can't drag him and fight at the same time. We need to stash him." They hid Cale in a secure maintenance locker, engaging the biostasis lock to keep him alive. It tore Lyriath apart to leave him, but the sound of boots on the grate was getting louder. "We draw them away," Lyriath said, her face a mask of cold fury. "We go to the reactor core. We end this." They ran. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. They were herded, cornered, pushed deeper into the station's industrial gut until they stood on a narrow gantry above the main reactor shaft. The shaft was a kilometer-deep pit of blue fire, the magnetic containment field humming with a sound that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. There was no way out. The door behind them was sealed, but sparks were flying from the hinges as the cutting torches on the other side began to work. They were trapped. And then, their comms buzzed, not the general channel, private, encrypted frequencies. Jonah's earpiece crackled. It was Commander Maddox. "Engineer Ree." Maddox's voice was calm, reasonable, cutting through the reactor's roar. "I know you can hear me. Listen closely. The situation has spiraled, but it is not salvageable." "Go to hell, Maddox," Jonah spat. "Think, Jonah." She pressed. "You are tired. You are scared. You are standing next to a biological weapon that has already killed your career. But I can fix it. Walk away. Open the door from your side. Step out with your hands up and leave the alien to us. You will go home. Reinstated. Full pension. A medal for containing the threat. You can see your family again." Jonah froze. His family. The messages he had sent into the void for 3 years. The face of his daughter he hadn't seen since she was 5. Simultaneously, Lyriath's neural link chimed. A holographic face projected onto her retina. It was Minister Vane, the head of her house. "Lyriath," the minister's voice was silk over steel. "You have been misled. The humans deceived you. But there is a path to redemption. Deliver the human engineer and the stolen data. Blame the rogue elements. You will return to Ketheri Prime as a hero. Your house will be elevated. Your honor will be clean. Do not throw your life away for a primitive." Lyriath stiffened. Honor. It was the only currency that mattered in the Empire. To return home not as a traitor, but as a savior. They stood there on the precipice, the blue light of the reactor washing over them. The cutting torches behind them hissed, glowing cherry red. Jonah looked at Lyriath. She was looking at him. They both knew what the other was hearing. The offers were tailored to their deepest wounds. Safety, home, redemption. "They want you," Jonah said over the roar. They want you, Lirith replied, her voice steady. I could go home, Jonah said. They promised me a full pardon. I could be a hero, Lirith said. They promised me my house. The air between them crackled. This was the moment the conspiracy counted on. The moment where biology and culture and fear outweighed the fragile thing they had built in the dark. Jonah looked at the comms unit in his hand. He looked at the door where the soldiers were waiting to take him back to a life of safe, lonely obedience. Then he looked at Lirith. He saw the woman who had crawled through a maintenance pipe with him. The woman who had laughed at his terrible coffee. The woman who had trembled in his arms, not from fear, but from want. You know what? Jonah shouted, his voice cracking with a sudden wild joy. I never liked that pension plan anyway. He ripped the earpiece out and threw it. It tumbled down into the blue fire of the reactor. Lirith watched it fall. A smile broke across her face, fierce, radiant, and terrifyingly beautiful. And I, she said, pulling the neural link chip from behind her ear, am tired of being a pawn. She flicked the chip over the railing. It joined Jonah's device in the abyss. They stood there, stripped of their lifelines, stripped of their safe exits. They had just declared war on two empires. Well, Jonah said, the cutting torches breaking through the final hinge of the door. That was incredibly stupid and incredibly romantic. We are Deathworlders now, Lirith said, grabbing his hand. We do not do safe. Jonah pulled a satchel charge from his belt. Cover your ears. He didn't blow the door. He blew the floor grating beneath the enemy soldiers just as they breached. The explosion dropped the front rank of the squad into the sub-level maintenance nets, creating enough chaos for Jonah and Lirith to swing across the gap on a reactor cable and disappear into the steam vents. They found refuge in a decommissioned pump room deep in the station's underbelly. It was small, damp, and lit only by the rhythmic pulsing glow of the auxiliary power conduits. They were safe for the moment. The station was too big, and the radiation from the reactor masked their biosigns. They collapsed against the wall, sliding down until they were sitting on the floor, shoulders touching. The adrenaline was fading, leaving them raw and exposed. You threw it away, Lirith whispered, staring at the opposite wall. Your family. You could have seen them. They aren't my family anymore, Jonah said quietly. My family is the people who stand by me when the airlock opens. My family is... Well, it's you. He turned his head to look at her. She was trembling again. I am terrified, she admitted, her voice small. I want this. I want us. But Jonah, where do we go? I am Violet. You are human. There is no world in this galaxy that will not stare at us. There is no home where we will not be monsters. Then we make one, Jonah said. He reached out, taking her hand. His fingers were stained with grease and soot. Hers were elegant and alien. They looked right together. I am scared too, Jonah confessed. I am scared that I'm going to get you killed. I am scared that love isn't enough to stop a kinetic railgun. It is not, Lirith said pragmatically. But it is enough to make standing in front of the railgun worth it. She turned to him, shifting until she was straddling his lap, her armor clinking against the floor. She framed his face with her hands. The bioluminescence on her skin was pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Lavender, soft blue, pale gold. Jonah, she breathed. She kissed him. It wasn't like the desperate collision on the ship. This was slow. It was a promise. It was a claiming. They didn't have sex. The urgency of survival and the exhaustion of the fight left no room for it. And yet, the intimacy was deeper. They lay down on the pile of canvas tarps in the corner, curling into each other. Jonah traced the glowing patterns on her back with reverent fingers, marveling at the biology that could create light from life. Lirith pressed her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. She listened to the steady, stubborn thump, thump, thump of the human engine. "It is so loud," she murmured sleepily. "It's just happy," Jonah whispered, kissing the top of her head. They lay there in the dark, two fugitives in a pump room, holding on to the only truth they had left. 2 hours later, they were moving again. Rest was a luxury they couldn't afford. They met up with Bax, the nervous information broker, and a limping but conscious Kale in a secure sub-basement. "You are insane," Bax said, his 4 eyes twitching. "You want to hijack the central array? That is suicide. That is worse than suicide. That is public relations suicide." "It is the only way," Jonah said, checking the magazine on his pistol. "If we just run, they will hunt us down one by one. If we broadcast the truth, if we show everyone the logs, the orders, the money trail, then the public outcry ties their hands. We light a fire so big they cannot hide the shadows," Lariath added. "Fine," Bax sighed, typing on his datapad. "I have looped the security feed. You have a 10-minute window before the automated defenses realize I have fed them a logic paradox." 10 minutes is plenty," Kyle grunted, adjusting the sling on his arm. "For a professional." He looked at Jonah. "Try not to trip over your own feet, human." "Good to see you too, Kale." Jonah grinned. They moved out, heading for the spire of the station, the broadcast array that could send a signal to every receiver in the sector. The climb was grueling. They fought their way past automated turrets and locked bulkheads. They were a ragtag team, a disgraced spy, a traitor engineer, a wounded tech, and a criminal broker, but they moved with a synergy that the elite squads hunting them couldn't match. As they reached the final access hatch to the control nexus, Jonah paused. He looked out the viewport. The station sprawled below them, a city of lights spinning in the void. Beyond it, the stars were cold and distant. "You know," Jonah said, wiping sweat from his brow. "This whole thing, it started because a bunch of aliens decided to hit a lonely outpost." He looked at Lirith. She was checking the charge on her weapon, her violet skin glowing against the stark metal of the hatch. "A lonely outpost," Jonah repeated, a grim chuckle escaping him. "And look at the mess we made." Lirith looked up. Her eyes were ancient and sad and filled with a fierce, burning hope. "Maybe," she said softly, walking over to him and placing a hand on his chest. "Maybe triggering the Deathworlders' SOS was the only way the universe was ever going to listen." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We screamed for help, Jonah, and for the first time in history, someone actually answered." Jonah nodded. He racked the slide of his shotgun. "Let's go tell the galaxy the truth," he said. He kicked the door open, and they stepped into the light together. The climb to the central broadcast spine of Helix 9 was not a stealth mission. It was a brawl against gravity and steel. The station's automated defenses, confused by the logic loops Bax had fed them, fired sporadically, turning the maintenance ladders and cable runs into a gauntlet of sizzling plasma bolts and deafening alarms. Jonah Rhee hauled himself up the final rung, his breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted of copper. His coat was shredded, scorch marks marring the heavy fabric, and his left boot was held together by thermal tape. Beside him, Lirith moved with a grim, terrifying focus. She had discarded her cloak, and her violet skin was slick with sweat and cooling hydraulic fluid. Her bioluminescence was no longer pulsing with emotion. It was a steady, flat, combat state gray. 200 meters to the nexus, Jonah wheezed, checking the readouts on his wrist comp. Bax, are the blast doors cycling? The voice of the information broker crackled in their earpieces, overlaid with the sounds of typing and distant explosions. I have tricked the system into believing there is a hull breach in the lower quadrant. The doors are opening, but the station AI is becoming irritable. You have 5 minutes before it reboots and vents the spine. We move, Lyriath said. She didn't look at Jonah. She couldn't. If she looked at the exhaustion etched into his face, she would stop. And if she stopped, they were dead. They sprinted down the final corridor, a transparent tube suspended in the vacuum at the very apex of the station. The stars wheeled dizzyingly around them. At the end of the tube stood the control nexus, a circular room dominated by a massive tree-like column of fiber optics and crystal storage banks. They breached the door, weapons raised. The room was not empty. Jonah skidded to a halt, his boots screeching on the polished deck. Standing by the central console, flanked by 4 Marines in heavy void armor, was Commander Ava Maddox. She looked impeccable, her uniform crisp, her face a mask of disappointed patience. But she wasn't alone. On the opposite side of the room, emerging from the shadows of the server banks like a phantom, was a Cathari squad. They were clad in ceremonial strike armor, the chitinous plates etched with the crest of the High Ministry. Leading them was a figure Lyriath knew better than her own heartbeat. Mentor, Lyriath whispered, the word slipping out like a curse. Strike Master Vox stepped into the light. He was old for a Cathari, his violet skin fading to a deep, bruised indigo, his movements stiff with the weight of 100 campaigns. He had taught Lyriath how to hold a knife. He had taught her how to lie. Lyriath, Vox said. His voice was deep, resonating in the chest. You have been very difficult to correct. Correction implies error, Lyriath said, straightening her spine, leveling her pulse pistol at the man who had been her father in everything but blood. I have made no errors, Vox. I learned my lessons well, especially the one about seeing the knife before it cuts. A standoff, Maddox noted dryly. Stepping forward, her Marines raised their rifles, but they didn't aim at Lyriath. They aimed at the Cathari. How predictable. It seems we all want the same thing. The data, Jonah said, stepping up beside Lyriath. He held his shotgun loose but ready. You aren't here to stop the broadcast because it is a lie. You are here to stop it because you want to own the truth. The truth is a strategic asset. Engineer Ree, Maddox said, her eyes cold. If that data goes public, it causes chaos. If the Terran Authority controls it, we have leverage. We can dictate the terms of the peace treaty. We can secure the border for a century. And if the Ministry holds it, Vox rumbled, his eyes fixed on Lyriath, we can purge the weak elements from our own court and unify the clans against a common threat. The narrative belongs to the strong. So that is it, Lyriath laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You are not enemies. You are bidders at an auction, and we are the merchandise. You are a traitor to your blood, Vox said, his hand drifting to the monofilament sword at his hip. You allow a human, a Deathworlder, to touch you. You conspire to humiliate your empire. Come back, Lyriath. Give me the drive. I will grant you a clean death. It is more than you deserve. She isn't going anywhere, Jonah said. He moved slightly, placing his body between Lyriath and the line of fire. And she doesn't need your permission to exist. Maddox sighed, checking her watch. This is tedious. Private military contractors are inbound to secure the exterior. I want that drive, and I want it now. Kill the alien. Stun the engineer. Secure the drive, Vox roared. Leave no witnesses. The tension pulled taut as a wire, snapped. The room erupted. Maddox's Marines opened fire on the Cathari. The Cathari returned fire with plasma casters. It was a chaotic crossfire, a storm of ballistics and energy that shredded the air. "Cover!" Jonah yelled, tackling Liriath behind a bank of servers just as the spot where they had been standing disintegrated under a hail of gunfire. "I need to get to the central pillar," Liriath shouted over the noise. "The hardline interface is the only way to override the lockout." "I will clear a path," Jonah said. He pulled a flashbang grenade from his belt, the last one. "On my mark." He didn't wait for her acknowledgement. He rolled out from cover, tossing the grenade into the center of the room. Bang! The flash was blinding. For a second, the firing stopped as human and alien alike flinched. Jonah surged forward, firing his shotgun. The heavy kinetic slug slammed into a Cathari soldier, knocking him back. Jonah wasn't trying to kill, he was trying to create space. He was a whirlwind of desperate, brawling violence, using the environment, swinging his empty shotgun like a club when the ammo ran dry. "Liriath, go!" Jonah screamed. Liriath broke from cover, sprinting toward the central pillar. She was fast, a blur of motion, dodging the suppression fire Maddox was laying down with her sidearm. Vok saw her. The old master didn't flinch at the flashbang. He had anticipated the move. He stepped out from behind a console, his plasma caster raised, tracking Liriath's path with cold precision. He wasn't aiming to capture. He was aiming for the center of mass. Jonah saw the barrel align. He saw Vok's finger tighten on the trigger. He saw Liriath, focused entirely on the console, unaware of the death tracking her. There was no time to shout. There was no time to think. There was only the instinct of a man who had spent 3 years alone and had finally found the one thing he couldn't bear to lose. Jonah threw himself across the gap. He didn't tackle Vok. He threw himself into the path of the bolt. The sound was sickening, a wet, sizzling thud. The heavy plasma bolt, meant to burn through Cathari combat armor, hit Jonah in the chest. His improvised flak jacket vaporized. The impact lifted him off his feet and threw him backward, slamming him onto the deck with a bone-shattering crash. "Jonah!" The scream tore from Liriath's throat. It wasn't a word. It was a sound of pure animal devastation. She skidded to a halt, turning to see Jonah lying on the floor, smoke rising from the blackened ruin of his chest armor. He wasn't moving. The room seemed to freeze. Vok lowered his weapon slightly, a flicker of surprise on his stoic face. Maddox paused, her pistol lowered. Liriath looked at Jonah, then she looked at Vok. The gray combat state of her skin vanished. In its place, her bioluminescence flared a blinding, violent white, the color of a dying star, the color of absolute, unmitigated rage. "You," Liriath whispered. She moved. She didn't use a gun. She moved faster than thought, a streak of white light. She was a shadow walker, trained in the arts of assassination, but she had always held back, always played the game of courtly restraint. Now, she unleashed it all. She hit Vok before he could raise his weapon again. She shattered his wrist with a palm strike, spun, and drove her elbow into his throat armor, crushing the vocalizer. As he fell, she grabbed his monofilament sword. She turned on the room like a hurricane. She was terrifying. She used the station's flickering lights, the smoke, the shadows. She was everywhere at once. A Marine went down, his rifle sliced in half. Another was thrown into a server rack with enough force to dent the steel. Maddox fired wildly, backing away, terror finally breaking through her icy mask. "Take her down! Take her!" Liriath appeared in front of her. She didn't strike. She simply grabbed Maddox's pistol, crushed the barrel with her mechanical gauntlet, and backhanded the commander across the room. Maddox crumbled, unconscious before she hit the floor. Silence fell over the Nexus. The remaining soldiers, battered and terrified, lowered their weapons, backing away from the glowing white-hot avatar of vengeance standing in the center of the room. Liriath dropped the sword. She fell to her knees beside Jonah. He was alive, barely. His breathing was a wet, shallow rattle. The plasma had cauterized the wound, but the shock was killing him. "Jonah," Liriath wept, her hands hovering over his chest, terrified to touch him and cause more pain. "Jonah, look at me." Jonah's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused. He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace of blood. Did we win?" he rasped, his voice a whisper. "We are winning," Liriath sobbed, pressing her forehead against his hand. "Stay with me, please, by the void, stay with me." "The signal," Jonah wheezed. "Finish it." Liriath looked at the console. The lockdown was still active. The manual interface required a biometric handshake that would take minutes to bypass. Minutes Jonah didn't have, unless she forced it. "I will finish it," Liriath vowed. She stood up. She walked to the central fiber optic pillar. She didn't type in a code. She reached up and ripped the panel off the neural interface port. Normally, a neural link required a calibrated shunt and a stabilizing agent. To jack in raw was agony. To jack in raw while overriding a military-grade lockdown was suicide. Liriath didn't care. She pulled the cable down and jammed the interface spike directly into the port behind her ear. She screamed. It was a sound that made the surviving soldiers flinch. Her body arched as the station's data stream flooded into her nervous system without a filter. Her bioluminescence flared so bright it was painful to look at. The patterns on her skin shifting from white to a burning, feverish gold. "Override," she commanded with her mind. "Break it all." The station fought back. Firewalls burned in her synapses like physical fire. She felt her memories fragmenting, her sense of self eroding under the torrent of binary code. But she held on to one thing, one image. Jonah. Jonah offering her terrible coffee. Jonah holding her in the dark. Jonah stepping in front of the gun. "Open!" The lock shattered. The central pillar lit up, a beam of pure data shooting up through the transparent ceiling, punching through the interference and spreading out into the void. The broadcast went live, across the sector on thousands of screens from the bridge of the Terran flagship to the datpads of miners on dusty moons, from the opulent halls of Cathari ministers to the grime-stained cantinas of the border. The signal hijacked the feed. There was no anchor, no graphics, just a raw dump of files, voice logs of Maddox authorizing the bait, financial transfers from Cathari guilds to Terran contractors. The full, unedited footage of the raid showing the Deathworlder SOS was active before the first shot was fired. And then, the video. A simple recording Jonah and Liriath had made in the pump room hours ago. On the screens, they sat side by side, dirty, exhausted, bleeding. Jonah looked at the camera with weary defiance. Liriath looked at him with undeniable love. "They told you we were monsters." Jonah's voice spoke from the screens, echoing across the galaxy. "They told you that fear was the only way to be safe. They lied. We are not enemies." Liriath's voice joined him, clear and melodic. "We are just people, and we are done dying for their profit." The feed cut to the live camera in the Nexus. The galaxy saw Liriath glowing like a supernova, connected to the machine, burning herself alive to send the truth. They saw Jonah Rhee, the human hero, bleeding out on the floor. They saw the price of the lie. Liriath ripped the cable from her head. She collapsed, smoke rising from the port, her skin gray and ashen. She crawled, dragging herself across the floor, leaving a trail of soot and tears, until she reached Jonah. She pulled him into her lap. The Nexus was silent, save for the hum of the cooling servers. "I did it," she whispered, stroking his hair. It is done. Jonah. They know. Jonah's eyes were fixed on her face. He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her cheek. You. He coughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. You are. Very bright. I am here, she wept. I am right here. You know, Jonah whispered, his voice fading to a thread. For someone raised to fear Deathworlders. You really picked the worst one to fall for. No, Liriath choked out, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I picked the only one. Jonah's hand fell. His chest stopped moving. Liriath threw her head back and wailed, a sound of grief that transcended species, a sound that echoed in the silence of the room. Then, the doors blew open. Not mercenaries, not assassins, rescue teams, medics wearing the orange crosses of the neutral coalition. And behind them, a mob of station civilians, dock workers, bartenders, mechanics, armed with wrenches and pry bars, who had seen the broadcast and come to save the people who had saved them. Medic, someone screamed. Get a stasis field on him, now! Liriath slumped over Jonah's body, her consciousness fading, her hand locked in his, refusing to let go even as the darkness took her. The galaxy did not change overnight, but it flinched. The lonely Outpost incident became a firestorm that no amount of spin could extinguish. The evidence was too raw, too massive. Maddox was arrested by her own junior officers. The Cathari High Ministry collapsed into a civil war of accusations and purges as the clans turned on the warmongers. The war that was supposed to cement power instead became a cautionary tale. The fleets held their fire, the kill zone orders were rescinded, and on a hospital ship drifting in neutral space, a human engineer woke up screaming. He was scarred. His chest was a roadmap of graft skin and cybernetic mesh. He breathed with the aid of a synthetic lung. But he was alive. And sitting in the chair beside his bed, reading a data pad with one hand while the other held his, was a Cathari woman. She wore civilian clothes, loose, flowing fabrics that didn't hide the burn scar behind her ear where the interface had nearly fried her brain. Jonah blinked, his throat dry as dust. Hey, he rasped. Liriath looked up, her eyes, no longer shadowed by the intrigue of the court, lit up with a joy that was blinding. Hey yourself, she whispered, leaning forward. Did we? Jonah paused, searching for the words. Did we win? We survived, Liriath smiled, squeezing his hand. And according to the news, we are now the most famous traitors in history. Half the galaxy wants to execute us. The other half wants to buy the movie rights. Sounds about right, Jonah groaned, leaning back into the pillow. He looked at her, his eyes softening. You stayed. I told you, Liriath said, leaning down to kiss his forehead, her skin glowing a soft, contented lavender. I do not do safe anymore. Epilogue. The sky above Outpost Serenity was a chaotic masterpiece. It was a binary sunset, one star orange, the other a piercing blue casting long double shadows across the purple grass. The outpost was small, a collection of modular domes and greenhouses built on a terraformed asteroid in the deep neutral zone. It wasn't a military base, it was a watchdog station, funded by crowdsourced donations and protected by a volunteer fleet of humans and aliens who had decided they were done with empires. Jonah Rhee sat on the porch of the main habitat, tinkering with a moisture evaporator. He moved a little stiffer than he used to, and the cybernetics in his chest hummed quietly when he exerted himself. But his hands were steady. You are doing it wrong, a voice called from the doorway. Liriath leaned against the frame, holding 2 steaming mugs. She looked radiant, her violet skin contrasting with the simple white tunic she wore. I am calibrating the humidity sensor, Jonah argued, not looking up. It thinks the air is too dry. It is clearly hallucinating. It thinks the air is too dry because you are blocking the intake with your elbow. Liriath teased, walking over and handing him a mug. Jonah took it, sniffing suspiciously. Is this real coffee? Liriath smiled. Bax sent a shipment. He says it is a bribe to keep us from releasing the file on his gambling debts. I like Bax, Jonah grinned, taking a sip. He understands leverage. He pulled her down onto the bench beside him. They sat together, watching the twin suns dip below the horizon. The silence between them was easy, comfortable. It was the silence of two people who had seen the end of the world and decided to build a new one. Any pings on the scope? Jonah asked, resting his arm around her shoulders. Quiet all day, Liriath said, leaning into him. Just a few merchant haulers and a lost drone. Boring, Jonah murmured. Peaceful, Liriath corrected. I like peaceful. Peaceful is good. Peaceful is great, Jonah agreed. He kissed her temple. But do you ever miss the running, the explosions, the terrible odds? Liriath looked at him, her eyebrow raised. Jonah, you have a synthetic lung because of the terrible odds. Do not be nostalgic for trauma. Fair point. Suddenly, the console inside the house chirped. It wasn't a standard hail. It was a sharp, rhythmic ping. Jonah and Liriath froze. They looked at each other. That's not a merchant hauler, Jonah said, the old alertness snapping back into his eyes. That is a distress beacon, Liriath said, already standing up. Frequency, unauthorized, encryption, heavy. Someone is in trouble, Jonah said, standing up and dusting off his hands. Someone the official channels are ignoring. Sounds like our kind of work, Liriath said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. Her bioluminescence shifted from calm lavender to a focused, electric indigo. You grab the flight bag, Jonah said, heading for the door. I'll warm up the shuttle. Jonah, he stopped, turning back to her. I love you, she said. It was simple. It was factual. It was the bedrock of their universe. I love you too, Jonah said. Now let's go see what kind of mess we can get into. They walked into the house together, partners, lovers, and the guardians of the dark places. The console pinged again, a lonely signal in the vast night. But this time, the lonely signal wasn't screaming into the void. It was calling to the two people in the galaxy who knew exactly how to answer it. And for the deadliest world and the most elegant empire, that was a start.